Another big story out of Illinois deals with whether the state is going to be able to entice the National Football League's Chicago Bears to stay not just in Chicago, but in Illinois. Joining me to discuss this developing story is the Center Square reporter, John Stife. John, before we get to the details of what we're expecting to see happen in the state of Illinois, let's listen to what Chicago Democratic State Representative Cam Buckner had to say after presenting his latest attempts to keep the Bears in Illinois to his fellow House Democrats.
That is aligned with the infrastructure conversation that Arlington Heights and the Bears need to have if they decide that they're going to be at the old racetrack. Obviously, I represent Soldier Field. I represent the museum campus. It's really important to me that something, whatever happens there, has to be something that respects the situation in that space. And so that is not in this bill at all. This bill doesn't touch that. But what I will say is that this bill does a few more things as well. It creates star bonds for the city of Chicago, which doesn't exist today. It creates the ready mechanism, which doesn't exist today. And it also does some work around downstate star bonds, and it gives tools to development here in the city of Springfield.
Now, John, as with a game of football, there's a lot of moving pieces and some important players in all of this. From the hundreds of pages you've been able to pour through of the most recent legislation, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I went to an expert to hear about it. I talked to Brian Costin a couple hours ago. He's from Americans for Prosperity, Illinois. He used to be a top analyst for Bruce Rauner on things like TIF. And this is essentially TIF. This is saying whatever a property is valued at right now, if you put a mega project there, instead of paying property taxes on that, you're going to get to pay a negotiated rate. And that rate can be anywhere from 10% of the value before you put the development there of the property, or less if the project is $2 billion or more, like we expect the Chicago Bears Stadium to be. The deal with this bill is that there's so many questions right now about the details of it. The Chicago Bears project is obviously the reason for the timing of the bill. It's why there's a push right now, but it applies to so many other projects across the state, including the rail project, the $20 billion rail project in Chicago that would be right across the street from Soldier Field and where it's at right now. The lawmakers are trying to get the Bears to commit to stay here. That's certain. But the question is, how much are they willing to give up to do that? Right now, the estimates are $343 million a year in property taxes that they would get otherwise is what the break that they're giving to the Chicago Bears. And the big question mark is, who makes up for the rest of that? Well, the way it's written right now, that could be taxpayers in the surrounding area of that project in Arlington Heights.
Now, clearly, this is a conversation that's been going on for years. We've seen different proposals that even the city of Chicago had put out there to maybe take a different part of the lakefront and have a big campus with all kinds of public space that could be utilized and all of the various property tax elements that are involved there. You have the Arlington Heights property that's an old racetrack where the Bears bought that. They straight up bought that property, looking to possibly build $1 billion entertainment complex. And all of that was going around back and forth, a lot of discussion. But then all of a sudden, Indiana came into the equation with earlier this year passing their own kind of enticement bill, right? How is that going to factor into this?
Well, in order to understand this, you got to kind of understand what Bears ownership is. Bears ownership is unique in the NFL. A lot of the teams, almost all the teams, are owned by rich people who came and bought the team. The Bears are not like that. They bought the team and then they made their money off the Bears. So if you look at it, the family that owns the Bears wants to be able to maintain that into the future. The unique part about the Arlington Heights project compared to Chicago, where they're at currently, compared to Indiana, is they own the land around it. They can develop that. They can make money off that, and they can make money off that year round. That's what they want to do. And with any project like this, the key components are, for getting a tax break, creating and sense of urgency. And that's what they've done here. They're like, the NFL is meeting in a week. We really need to decide now. We need to know before this meeting what we're going to tell them. Indiana's gave us this great offer. We need to get a better offer than that from Illinois. When the reality is, getting $1 or $2 billion towards a stadium from Indiana doesn't compare to the long-term 35-year benefit of having this development and making money off of development, even if they are going to pay for the stadium themselves at Arlington Heights and benefit from all these property tax breaks. It's really a negotiating tactic in order to get whatever tax break they can out of the state of Illinois and out of local taxpayers. They call it taxpayer certainty, but the reality is paying less tax than any other business. And one of the big question marks is all the other businesses, the development around it, is that included? Are they going to get tax breaks? Are they going to pay any property tax? Can I put a bar next to the stadium and then they don't pay the same property taxes as a bar that's outside of the mega project in Arlington Heights? Is that fair?
Yeah, it's the idea, picking winners and losers, and is government in the process of doing that in the state of Illinois? And I think it's interesting to talk about, the bargaining chips that are being laid out here and exactly the timing of those bargaining chips. This issue has been quiet in Illinois for weeks. And here we are at the tail end of legislative session with the pressure mounting to get this across the finish line with a whole host of other things. Meanwhile, you've got, the city of Columbus and Franklin County recently approving $50 million for a women's soccer team in a different part of the country. This is an issue that's not just relegated to NFL or Chicago. This is happening across the country.
The Kansas City Royals announced it today. They're going to have a new stadium in downtown Kansas City. Hallmark is going to move out of their offices. They're going to build something there. They're going to get a bunch of taxpayer benefits. And they benefited from negotiations with the Kansas City Chiefs, where they were competing between Kansas and Missouri. Where are we going to go? If you leave that question in the air long enough, somebody's going to give you a bunch of taxpayer dollars.
Well, John, let's talk about something else. A little bit north of Illinois in Wisconsin, you've got the Department of Instruction recently going to the Wisconsin Dells, where I've been there once. It's a bunch of water parks and hotels and whatnot. But what was the DPI doing there, and what do we know about this conference?
Well, this all came out of the standards changing for schools and how they're measured in 2024. So there was a lot of questions. How do these standards change? And they didn't go up. Schools were performing worse, so the standards went down. DPI, which is the Department of Education in the state, said, well, this wasn't us. We put together a panel of experts, 88 experts from across the state, and they came up with these standards. They recommended it, and then we approved it. And we hired this company, Data Recognition Corp, to conduct it. So, okay, questions. How much did you spend on that? When did you do it? Well, as it turns out, they spent nearly $370,000 spending 4 days in the Wisconsin Dells at a beautiful resort there and spending all kinds of money, like $13,000 for laptops and hotspots, things that would be there if you were in the state capital where DPI is located. They chose to do it elsewhere. And then the problem now is that people want more records from what occurred there, and they believe that the 88-member council that decided this could be considered an ad hoc committee. So they should have had noticed meetings, open meetings, minutes, records from what happened. So public records requests were put in. DPI didn't respond right away. They took them a couple months. Then they sent a copy of the 300-page report that they sent out, which was changing the standards. As it turns out, there were a lot more records that they didn't show, so they were challenged on it. There were questions sent to the Department of Justice in the state, and then they released more information kind of piecemeal. And last week, there was a committee meeting looking into, okay, did they follow open meetings? Did they follow the public records law in Wisconsin? And the committee wasn't happy with the response because DPI went in and they said, well, this was a third-party contractor, and so they're not subject to public records, which brings up the question, okay, if your public body decides to offload something to a third party, they still should follow public records laws because this is how they created the policy for the state of Wisconsin.
Well, and they're dealing with public issues using tax dollars to fund these things and to go to Wisconsin Dells for a retreat. Pretty remarkable. So what happens now? I mean, are taxpayers going to get a full understanding of the decisions that were made at this conference to change the standards for education, which their kids are going through these taxpayer-funded schools?
Well, there's a complaint filed in Adams County, which is where the Wisconsin Dells are located, over the open meetings from a group called IRG, which is the Institute for Reforming Government in Wisconsin. And separately, there are more questions about the open records policy. There's committee meetings that are going to come up where they're going to look further into this. And ultimately, there will likely be a legal challenge to get all these documents, because at the end, they produced a 300+ page document about changing the standards. So then to go back and claim, well, there's no records, there's no recordings, there's no minutes of the meetings, there's nothing that we can give you. It just doesn't add up, because how else are you going to produce this 300-page document other than having records, recordings, notes from these meetings? Those should all be public record, and they haven't given them up until now.
You know, it's pretty remarkable, and I think people should definitely stay close to that story because, again, you know, transparency is important when it comes to taxpayer dollars and how those are being used. And when you have this type of non-transparent organization doing an off-site junket of sorts and then producing policy records that are going to impact schools, for instance, definitely of interest to the taxpayers. And then, John, I mean, that secrecy could lead to litigation that taxpayers are going to have to pay. And then any kind of finding or damages that are going to be paid out in attorney's fees, again, is also probably likely going to come from taxpayers as well. So people definitely need to stay close to this story and more. Appreciate you, John, being here for these. And you can find his work at thecentersquare.com.